Hello and welcome to a TU edition of the Tulsa World Sports Extra Show. I'm Patrick Prince, joined by TU beat writer and my good friend Michael Peters. Mr. Peters, TU has a coach. They introduced Tre Lamb yesterday. What'd you think?
Uh, he did a nice job. I don't know that he was quite as charismatic as Ryan Switzer was in his short time as the interim coach and his one press conference. But Tre Lamb, he did really well. He hit all the right points. I think at some level, he did the rah-rah stuff that you have to do, but then he also did the equivalent of breaking out a PowerPoint presentation for his plan for the program because he went into some really in-depth detail on here's what I want as a coaching staff. I want to hire X number of coaches who have, Division One experience. I want one group of five former head coach who I can really lean on. I want these guys to have Oklahoma and Texas experience. And so he really broke it down in a really exact sort of way. So you know that he'd been planning it for quite a while. I think he showed quite a bit of ego, which I would think you would if you're any head football coach. And so an ego is good. You have to have it. So he's very confident. And and for somebody who's 35 years old, that's probably pretty impressive that he's as confident as he is to walk into this. I think Bill Haston made a really good point in his column from the press conference, which is this is probably the first modern NIL era coach in Tulsa history, the first person who really understands what the modern game is going to be like and embraces the modern game and is not just doing it because that's what you have to do now. It will be interesting to see how he fills out his staff. Like we mentioned, that he's bringing, I guess, three of his assistants over from East Tennessee State. He's going to keep on Ryan Switzer. That's a good start. He had talked about hiring someone with a group of five head coaching experience. Not sure who that is, but it'll be interesting to see what name that is that pops up. So it was a really good start for him, and he's going to hit the ground running, and he has to because they've got lots of holes to fill.
When TU hired Kevin Wilson, they went with a veteran guy, offensive-minded guy. This time they went with another offensive-minded guy, but a much younger guy, 35. What does that say?
I think it says they wanted someone who is more in the current process of college football, who understands NIL, who embraces it, who understands more the player free agency era of football and is not bothered by it. I think one of the things that we haven't really written about, but that Tre Lamb said in his press conference is fans and media cannot freak out if we lose six or seven players every year to the transfer portal because that is the way football works now. That is how it's going to be. You can't do that. You have to, keep a clear mind about it. You have to keep the guys that you really want to keep, be disappointed about the few you lose who you'd like to keep and then continue to build. And so I think that's the approach. I mean, I think what we talked about, and I guess we'll get into maybe, other potential candidates or whatever. I think they had some other, people. I mean, I think one of the names that have been kicked around, like Colin Klein, the A&M offensive coordinator, who's former Kansas State offensive coordinator and quarterback. And, Tre Lamb in the end might be a better choice than someone like that. Tre Lamb is going to come to Tulsa not comparing it to A&M or Oklahoma or Ohio State. And, he's not going to be disappointed in what he doesn't have. He's going to be amazed by what he does have. He's coming from East Tennessee State. He's coming from Gardner Webb, two FCS schools that are smaller. He just signed a 4-year contract extension. Was going to make $275,000. He's now going to make somewhere in the neighborhood of what our reporting says about 1.4 million. That's a big difference. He's going to have a much larger pool for assistants. He's got much better facilities, I would imagine. Plus, he's got the commitment of President Brad Carson and Athletic Director Justin Moore to devote even more money to an indoor practice facility, which we've heard for the last 15 years.
Kenya.
But maybe this is the time we're going to do something like that. Potentially renovations to the Case football complex that is really nice, but probably not nice on the scale of modern Division I football. So those are all the things that are coming, but I think probably in the end, it's probably better. He has head coaching experience, which is awesome. And Justin Moore, mentioned in the press conference, that was something that he was really cluing in on because he felt like somebody needed to have been in that chair before, even if it was at the FCS level. It needs to be someone who has had the responsibility of being the head coach before. And I think that's a good point. But also, it's going to now be someone who doesn't see some of what Tulsa has as limitations. He sees it as, opportunity.
You mentioned this earlier, but retaining Ryan Switzer, good move.
Yeah, I think it's a good move. He was super charismatic, and he did. I don't know how much responsibility he would get single-handedly for the development of the receivers. And I mean, I guess he gets responsibility for them struggling for so long during the year, and it taking so long for some of the freshman guys to emerge. But in the end, Corey Smith, true freshman, who is still not in the transfer portal, is still coming back. He had a great year. Clearly, Cam Benjamin, who's a senior who's gone, he had a great year. And then Joseph Williams was the freshman of the year in the American Athletic Conference. Now, unfortunately, Joseph Williams, I saw a graphic on Twitter yesterday that maybe he has 50 some odd um, scholarship offers now in the portal. So I mean, he's going to end up someplace. I think he's taking a visit to Colorado later. That's a guy who's going to be gone, but Ryan Switzer does take on some of the responsibility of having him go from a guy who had no catches until the North Texas game to having three straight 100-yard games toward the end of the season. And again, in that Thursday night ESPN showcase against East Carolina, he looked like a superstar. So Ryan Switzer gets some of that. He's very charismatic. He kept the recruiting class together. Something else that we talked to Tre Lamb about that we haven't written about yet is how impressed Tre Lamb was with the signing class they had. He talked about how on Monday he and Coach Switzer had gone through, watched film of them. He was really impressed with those guys. So I think they are starting to have a good relationship. And like I say, Ryan Switzer, good young coach, good reputation, very charismatic. It seemed like a no-brainer to try to keep him on staff if it was possible.
You and our colleague Barry Trammell had a conversation with Brad Carson yesterday at the presser. What did that allow?
Well, Brad Carson is bullish on athletics. I mean, I think he talked about, I'll have a story here posted a little bit later at tulsaworld.com. He talked about how 4 or 5 years ago, there was some really serious discussion on campus, I guess before his time, as to whether Tulsa should abandon athletics completely. Should they go to Division III? Should they perhaps drop football down to FCS and keep the other sports at Division I and try to go for a more Big East type of model with Villanova and those kind of schools, maybe concentrate on basketball. But those things are no longer the case at the university. He is very bullish on athletics. He is very confident in Justin Moore's ability to get Tulsa where they need to be in the American Athletic Conference. And he at least says publicly that he wants to spend what the top tier schools, the AAC, spend in facilities, in hiring coaches, in doing NIL types of things to retain players, and with the athlete revenue sharing that's going to come here in the next year or so, given the latest NCAA lawsuit settlement. So he says all of those things. One of the things that he talked about that we've talked about forever, he says you cannot be serious about Division I FBS football if you don't have an indoor practice facility. Now, when, where, how, don't know, but I think he's in the process of trying to raise money for those kind of things. Justin Moore is out trying to raise money. One of the people that I talked to briefly, who doesn't talk very often, Michael Case, who has his name on at least two of the most important athletic facilities, the tennis center that is still, even now, I guess probably 20 or more years after it was built, is still one of the premier tennis facilities in all of Division I college tennis. Same with the Case Center, which is very nice football facility that overlooks the end zone. Those are all his. And he was there and he was shaking hands and he was talking. And I think, they're going to try to find him and then some other people to help out. As President Carson said, Tulsa has a lot of wealthy donors. It's not about money, it's about getting access to that money.
Okay. All right, last question. I asked you this in our previous video, but for those who didn't see it, I want to ask you again. Can TU, and you've kind of addressed it with your previous answer, but can TU compete in the NIL era?
I do think so. I think with this commitment, they definitely can. I think it'll be hard, obviously. And as we talked about in our last video, it's uncertain because competing today in the NIL era of college athletics is not going to be the same as competing 2 years from now in the NIL era, or maybe 5 years from now. It could be totally different. If, if the 70 best college football programs decide they're going to break away from the NCAA and get into one league all on their own, like a little NFL, and play all of their sports there, well, then Tulsa might not be in that group. And then you'll have to reconsider and see what happens. If things stay in this ballpark, which there is some thought that because television contracts, I think, are through the 2030s, that there could be a window of 5 or 6 years where things stay this way. I think so, as long as they're willing to make those commitments and to be in the higher end of the AAC, because as we're talking about, Boise's going to the playoff. Boise's getting a home football game in the playoff. How big a deal would a home football game in the college football playoff be for the University of Tulsa? I mean, what would that be like to have a college football playoff game coming here? What would it be like if you won a college football playoff game? What would it be like to then go to the Cotton Bowl after that and get to play in a national quarterfinal? I mean, these things are all on the table if you win the AAC. And now they have that opportunity. They just have to find the right coach and the right players to do it. They're hoping Tre Lamb is that guy. If he does as well as I think he thinks he's going to do, then they could be in that spot, rather quickly. That was the one thing I wanted to, that I wanted to say, and I posted this on Twitter. This is the quote that's going to stick with people. I want to win fast. This is not a complete rebuild. I firmly believe we could come in here in year one and make it to a bowl game. There's no reason this should take 3 years like it used to. He's on the fast track. He wants to be on the fast track. Now, part of that is I think he wants to be on the fast track because he thinks that maybe in 3 years, he's going to be a Power 4 coach. And maybe 10 years after that, he's going to be Georgia's coach. That's probably what he has in his mind at this moment. But that's the thing that's going to stick with people. So if you're going to say that in a press conference, you got to come deliver. So we'll see what happens in the portal and spring practice, and then when they start games again in August.
All right, Michael, great stuff. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much.